say anything bad about me, I said it didn't hurt me, so you want to make sure you just take it.
Okay, I'll watch my phone.
This is what I emailed. You're welcome this morning. Is that for me? Oh, okay. All right, so topics for the test. Kind of give us a nice little overview of what's going to be on what you have to study for the test. I emailed this to you this morning. There was one change from what I talked about, what I sent you before. Remember in blue it said these are the topics that are going to be on the test. Do you remember that thing where I said these are the topics? I included in that blue list the one video, the Teenage Brain video. And if you look here at the top here under the note, there's no sense going, I mean that information will be on the test, but it's not all of it will be, and it's being covered some other place. Okay, so you don't need to watch the video if you don't want. Okay? But that's the only change. Everything else is staying the same in terms of topics. Now, unfortunately, I already had written a bunch of stuff up here which I want to use, so I'll try and keep everything right in here for this to kind of go over what it is that, some of the things I think you should think about for the test. And you can just, and I just left these boxes here for you just to take some little notes and that, but this really is not a substitution for going back into these documents and then looking at them in terms of everything I'm writing here. Okay? Because I'm just going to go through this relatively quickly. So if you look at the first one, I mean basically, and this is kind of the way I have the class, you know, we have a topic and then what it means, what the topic is, and then on the right it says how it applies to teaching, because that's really the bottom line. All right, so if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, it's the revised version, which is the one we have in our readings. You want to look at the levels. I'm not going to ask you to write the 6 levels and memorize those levels, but you are going to be able to have to differentiate between them. Okay? So what that means is, if I would say, what level is this question at, I would give you the levels, the names of them. Okay, so you have to memorize them. All right? Does that make sense? Taylor, you okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, I can't really see through these. I can just see that you were looking over here. I didn't know.
Oh, no, I was just paying attention. No, you're good. I was just focusing.
These are reading lessons. Everyone's blurred out. The importance of context. That is a big, coming back up a little bit. Bloom talked about 4 types of knowledge, and we've talked about these. I'm not going to test this. So on page 2 of this first chapter, it says factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge, and metacognitive knowledge. You probably do know those. I'm not going, though, to talk about those in terms of Bloom, okay, on the test. So at the bottom, I think of the second page, Bloom's taxonomy revised, and then there are the levels I was just talking about: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So if I'm going to ask you anything about where you have to identify which levels of Bloom, I'm going to give you those names. It's not really important that you know the names, so to speak, in other words, to memorize them, but to be able to apply these ideas in a lesson. So if you were applying the higher levels of Bloom's in a lesson, it's like terrific. Who cares if you know it's called evaluating? Okay, you'd be really doing a good job. And that's really the bottom line. The importance of context, and that's what it says in here, the second item I'm looking here in the middle, what it is. What I'm talking about is the situation in which you're asking the question or presenting the task is one of the big determining factors whether it's at remembering or creating. In other words, where it's falling on those levels. The context means everything. Like, for example, if I ask in this class, what is the noun in this sentence, I would expect that you already know it. That's why it's here at the very bottom, remembering. Okay, so for this class, it's remembering. Now, if we were in a 4th grade class, I could have just taught them what a noun is, and then if I ask, what is the noun in this sentence, that moves up to understanding, because they just learned it. So the difference between remembering and understanding, again, you have to take into account who you're asking the question of, but remembering is something you already know. So if I asked you, what's your name, before you come into my class, that's remembering. You already knew that before my class. If I'd say, what's Norman Webb's depth of knowledge, maybe most of you hadn't heard of that before, and so let's say I talked about it, I said, here's what Norman Webb's depth of knowledge is, and then if I ask you, what is Norman Webb's depth of knowledge, that would be understanding. Because, I just learned something, and I'm showing you I understand it. You see the difference between the two? Are we okay between those two? Okay, applying, and again, it depends on the person, on the situation. So applying, where can you use the Pythagorean theorem? So it's going to, if we talked about the Pythagorean theorem, and all we did was we worked out equations with them, and then I said, where might you use this? And now they have to think about where in life would I use that? That's applying. If on the other hand, I told them, well, you can use it when you do this, this, and this, and then I ask them, where can you use it in life? Well, now it's down to understanding. See, they didn't have to think about, they had to remember what I told them. And it was brand new information, so it doesn't go to the bottom. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so applying, again, where can you use it? So it says ask of a 10th grade geometry student, but the assumption is that they have not talked about where you could apply this in real life. Okay? Analyzing what information you can get from the table called a periodic table. So ask a senior chemistry student, or a senior, I'm talking about high school, they're looking at it for the first time. So I'm looking at this thing and now I gotta analyze it. I see names, I see numbers, I see this, I see different things on there. You see I'm breaking it down for myself. So I'm analyzing it. Okay? Now if I'd ask them, and after they analyze it, and I taught them all about the periodic table, and I said, okay, what's on the periodic table? And they're saying, okay, let me remember what you taught me. That moves to understanding. Are we okay with this? Then I'll keep going on. All right, so that's what I mean by the context in the sheet I gave you. Higher level based upon content. I knew there was something, I forgot what I wanted to say about that. Maybe I'll come back to that. Okay, Norman Webb's depth of knowledge. If you recall, there were 4 levels, and you analyzed your own lessons in terms of these 4. And what we found was, and this is pretty typical, that most of your levels, not everybody's, but most were at level 1 or level 2. At level 1, and you can kind of see what the teacher's doing. They're questioning, they're directing focus, they're showing, they're telling, they're demonstrating, they're providing examples. In other words, teachers, when you think about the activity in the classroom, the teacher seems to be the most active person in the classroom. The students is recognizing, they're responding, they're remembering, they're memorizing, they're restating. So the teacher says something and they restate it. And that's where a lot of typical lessons in high school are at, okay, at that level. It's the lowest levels in terms of the depth of knowledge. So it doesn't require a lot from the students, it requires a lot from the teacher. Okay, the second one, now you can start to see that it's starting to move up the levels of Bloom's, because now the teacher is questioning to differentiate. In other words, what's the difference between this and this? Okay, so now you see I'm starting to pose questions at a little bit higher levels that require a little bit more thinking on terms of the students. I'm not just telling them, this is the difference between this and this. I'd be at 1. I'm saying, what do you see as the difference between this and this? Okay, now they got to do some analysis, and you can see there's some analyzing in there. I'm organizing, I'm exploring possible options or connections with the students. So they're just possible. It's up to the students to think about them. So it's requiring the students to do more. So you can see the role is moving from the teacher to the students now. The students are solving routine problems, still relatively routine, but they have multiple decision points. So now they've got some deciding, they've got some evaluating to do. Some analysis, they got to say, okay, what should I do, this or this, based on what? So you can see it's starting to be a little bit less directed by the teacher. Okay? A lot of teachers are in this area too, and I think many of our lessons were in level 2. And now the challenge is really to get to the 3rd level. And I'll tell you why the 4th level isn't always the goal. The 3rd level, let's just move right to what the students are doing, because you can really see a big difference in the student role. They uncover, select relevant information, credible supporting evidence. So they're uncovering, in other words, they're doing some kind of exploration. So they're given all this information, maybe they're going onto the internet, but the teacher isn't saying, this is what you have to use in this. This is where you have to go to understand this. They're saying, here's a problem, go ahead and here's all this information, go ahead and piece through it, see what you need, see what you don't need. You see how it's again, much more challenging for the students. They're critiquing, which means they have to make evaluations. Think about Bloom's, we're getting to the highest levels of Bloom's now. They're debating, they're making judgments, they're planning, they're making plans for maybe how they're going to solve something. They're initiating questions now. So the students are saying, bless you, rather than the students simply saying, what do you want me to do? They're starting to question each other and the teacher saying, I'd like to do this, but I'm not sure how to go. Do you know how I might go about finding this information? The teacher might just pose another question back. In other words, they have really authentic questions beyond saying, how am I supposed to do this? It's like they're really deeply involved and they're thinking about it. So it'd almost be like in this class, if you would say, okay, Dr. Christie, I really understand this, and here I'm working on this lesson, and now I'm at this point here, and look here, I'm thinking I'm in level 3, but I might be in level 2. What do you think? In other words, you are really involved in that, and you're asking me a much deeper question than, am I doing this right? Okay? Does this sort of make sense? That's really the goal for most lessons. At least you'd say at least half the time, because as you're moving up these levels, the same with Bloom's, the higher level you go to, the more time it takes. Okay, and schools aren't giving us any more time. They're saying, yeah, they're supposed to be evaluating and analyzing and creating. Yeah, they're supposed to be at level 3 in Norman Webb's, but we aren't giving you any more time for that. But when you have to think about something and apply something and analyze something, that's taking a lot more time than it is for the teacher to say, here's what you're going to do this right now and do it this way. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's where that's where I see one of the biggest challenges for, it's almost like, to me it's the biggest, how can I say this? The schools, the Department of Education, they want students to think deeper and better, so to speak, have a higher quality of thinking, and that's a great goal, and they should do that, but then they aren't providing the time to do it. Okay? And so that's the one thing I think that they're missing, and they aren't providing the teachers with the resources for how to do it. Okay? So they're moving in the right way theoretically, but practically they aren't necessarily allowing a lot of, they aren't able to make it happen. Now the 4th one, the reason I say, this one is terrific, but what it means is that you're going to, it's extended thinking level 4. I'm not going to test you on this. I'm really going to look at the differences between 3, like what a lesson would look like in level 3 versus 2 and 1. But in 4, basically you are talking about longer term projects. So it isn't going to be a day or 2 lesson. It's going to be something that's going to take maybe a couple weeks. students, they have to design something, they have to take risks when they're doing it. In other words, I'm gonna design this research project, I'm not really sure it's going to work or not. Okay, so I'm gonna do some testing, but you see it's gonna take me a lot of time thinking about and working on it. Synthesizing, meaning bringing together different resources, collaborating with others, plans, and creates concrete, tangible products. Okay, so that one would be something that you might do once or twice a year in a class, and you might do it with another teacher. Okay, it's like the art teacher and the history teacher might get together and say, okay, we have this project that we're going to do. I think I handed out something like that too, where the art teacher would go to the history teacher, and the history teacher would say, okay, this is what I'm teaching, this is what I'm doing, you know, can you create something that will help me to use in my classroom? And then some of the art people would be saying, okay, yeah, I can do that, you know, so I'm gonna send my students really down to really talk to you to see what you need. I'm facilitating it, but really the students are the ones that are going to come down here and say, here's what they really need. Okay, so, you know, Mr. Sepik, what do you need in your class? You know, I understand, and okay, how are we going to use it in an authentic way? It's not just going to be, oh, here's a picture of George Washington, okay, but it's going to be something that's going to be actually part of the class, and then you're going to take that back, the students are going to take it back and say, come to you, the teachers, and say, okay, here's what they need. I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to do this. You see how that's an authentic question. I'm not sure I'll be able to use these materials like this, and you help them say, you'd be saying, well, maybe we use these types of materials, but see, it's a very authentic project. Okay, something authentic comes out of it. All right, so you can see where you do that maybe once or twice a year, and you really would want to coordinate that. Okay, are we okay with Norman Webb's? I'm on the back of the first page, and I think the rest of this has been the stuff that we have just been talking about for the last like 5 weeks. Physical structures of the brain, so we've been talking about those, the hormones and neurotransmitters, okay, and we've been talking about those. I'm not going to really review those much now. The abstract thinking, on the third page, identity formation, and I just want to remind you, there's 2 files on Blackboard with identity formation. One is the brain physiology, and I've listed these in that email that I sent earlier. One is this one right here, which really all the rest, which I'm getting most of these topics from that I'm talking about now. But there is one down here, Marcia, somewhere down in here. There he is, I just saw him. There we go. Talks about identity too. Okay, metacognition and sleep, those are all coming from, again, this brain physiology. Specific learning disabilities, Jean Piaget, now that's getting into our newest theories of learning, it's just the first 6 pages. Accommodations versus modifications, you might want to go to this video right here, and you don't have to go very far, and you can kind of skip through to see what the differences are. And then trauma, what we just covered last time, and that one is actually on video too, so the information I've given to you. So any questions about what we just talked about, what we just talked about? Okay. All right. Well, now I wanted to, there was interest in some other icebreakers. I got one of those sticky notes early on. I had never forgotten. I put this is in those documents, as a matter of fact. Let me see if it's up here. I know I have it somewhere in here, but I'm just going to hand this out. Oh, yeah, I can do it next time.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting on the
Lev Vygotsky is math. No, Sid isn't here, no one else is gonna. All right, so if you just look at the icebreakers, just a lot of ideas. You can see I got these from the internet. I didn't get a really good feedback from the people I asked for icebreakers. I mean, I actually asked the faculty here, can you give me some icebreakers for my class? I got one, we're gonna try it in here, and you might have already seen it too. But, so these are some that you can see I just downloaded. And you have to be kind of careful with it, because the very first one was a snowball fight. And I think what they do is they write some facts, or they write something down, they put them in snowballs, and they start hitting each other with them. They go outside and start throwing. I mean, that could be dangerous. So you'd have to have a special class to do something like that. But there are some good ideas in here. Okay? Now, what I'd like to do with you is one Dr. Dietrich has done in, I believe, her 103 class. You may have already seen this, but I thought it was a good one that we might do in here. So if we can get into 2 groups of 5, and we're just going to go ahead and if you just follow these directions up until about 10, about 10 till, and then I want to start talking about Vygotsky. Okay? So we have these, I guess, 5 here. Amanda, would you and Jack, and the 3 artists and English. Okay? Well, let me just kind of go through this. It's been a little while since I've been able to look at this. Okay, so you need the post-it notes, which you have there. Have everyone divided into small groups. Ensure each table has several post-it notes. The goal of the game is to connect mini stories in an interesting way. So again, these icebreaker really, this is about building relationships. And now you're building relationships between the students themselves. And why is that so important? Because it's going to make your class go a lot better, less bullying, less disruptions, more, okay, we're in this together, we understand each other, more camaraderie, and so on, okay, which helps with behavior management. Okay, the goal of the game is to connect mini stories in an interesting way. Each person must share at least one item that connects to the other mini stories. The longer the chain of items that are created, the better. Write down a few words on a post-it note to keep track of each part of the story. First player begins by sharing an interesting memory or experience that they have. For example, one player can say, one time I accidentally locked myself out of the house, so then I spent the entire day at a coffee shop. Any other person can tell a related story that has any similar themes or elements to the previous story. For example, the next person can say, I'm a total coffee addict. Every day I drink 3 cups of coffee, and it sometimes prevents me from being able to sleep at night. The next player, based upon the previous story, can share something such as, I don't sleep much at night because I play lots of computer games until early morning. Okay, so you continue to, let's see, do that, let's see. So it says to remember the story, write a few words in a post-it note. At the end of the game, the group with the longest connected chain of stories is the winner. We don't have to worry about that. I just want you to work on it for about 10 minutes, and then at a quarter till, we'll just share what stories you have, and then at 10 till, we'll talk about Vygotsky. Okay?
You sounded like Eeyore from, oh, just go down the river.
I'll just go, sure. These are impulse type things, right?
I feel like I was born.
My very first relationship ended because, I was like 14, ended because I got a bee stuck in between my pants and my underwear while I was walking with her. And she was not impressed with how I reacted to that. So
we don't fully.
And I was like, I like stopped and I was like, are you okay? And she just.
She was fine.
I went to the restroom and I was like, what's happening right now? And like, I'm not a big camper, like, she could have stayed on the sidewalk, like,
No good experience.
I got hit by a car last year on my bike. Yeah, you didn't know that? I thought everybody knew that. You didn't know that either? Okay, so my grandpa calls me one day, first semester last year, and he goes, Taylor, you need to go get your bike shot. And I was like, okay. So I get on my bike and so I get on my bike and I ride to walk, and I get my flu shot and I'm coming back. Yeah, I get my flu shot and then I'm driving down the sidewalk and I stop at like a crosswalk and it's red, so I stop. Red screen, I go, there's a guy turning right and he's like, and then
Pretty sure I remember
just
this story.
kidding, see you, it was my fault, and I was like, what?
You must
I was
put
like,
a
I am
sticky
wearing a
note with
regular
one or
raincoat,
two,
and I pointed to like the
you know,
seconds
things.
and I was like, you hit me with your car and I still had 19 seconds to get across the street.
Car accident.
Yeah, it was sick. Huh? No, but, basically what happened was,
Yeah.
he didn't have insurance, so, basically what happened was the state took over the case and then the state gave me a grant that he has to pay off. So he's probably still paying it off. But the state gave him I had a car for like a month and a half.
My brother slipped and was in school because he was watching someone else's poor kid. He broke his ankle and he was unconscious for that. And then his floor on the pool was real wet. So I was just went under.
Yeah, I got sick.
Oh my god. I was like, Mom, why did you swim in the school? They didn't have a wet floor, so I didn't get paid.
Yeah.
That's
my
So
story
I
was
just
really
like
good.
busted his arm leg.
No.
This poor kid.
Wait, do you guys watch Bob Burgers? Yeah. Do you know, do you remember that episode where Tina gets, she like sprains her ankle and then she gets
It's just connecting
this like
stories.
robot
Some things that we told
and
that
she like, it's basically like a FaceTime call with this robot and the robot goes to school and like,
You said trucks?
Do you know what I'm talking about?
We have
Vaguely.
trucks.
I don't remember
Been a
exactly,
minute.
but.
and she like, and then there's like a school like party at like a beach, so she like takes the robot to the beach and like, it like gets stuck in the sand and like,
Yeah, I live like an hour east of here in North Ohio. Yeah, just one stop in town.
You just wanna escape from reality.
Yep.
Would you not like it? Sort of more.
Oh, I knew my mom would like it better up there, cause that's like,
Oh,
like,
no.
people always ask about traffic.
Yeah.
at that time.
I will keep me on faster every summer year at high school. And it was 10th period of the last period of last
You have
summer.
10 periods?
You're from
Yeah.
New York.
We had 8 or 7. We had 8, yeah.
Why is it all the time?
So
Okay,
I
so
went in the hallway and I was like
Pretty cool to do.
running kind of fast towards her.
Yeah.
And all the singers were down the hallway.
Yeah.
I am.
And I just like, my ankle buckled and I just
Okay.
never come more. Not
Okay.
gonna say that.
Yeah, just one. Are we still going to store or are we, which is fine, we have.
We're just talking.
Okay.
Yeah, but we have a pretty good story, so.
Okay. All right, how about then if we just start this a little bit earlier? And first off, do you see any benefits from doing this in a classroom?
Yeah.
It got us to.
Yes?
I think there's a lot of benefits because I feel like traditional icebreakers or like the little forms teachers give you, I feel like it gives you the chance instead to share something that you actually want to share about yourself instead of like your favorite color, you know, and like where
Yeah.
you were born, because that stuff isn't like,
Yeah, it's like something interesting, like it's something more than that, like it's utilizing to share a story that kind of tells us about, that tells a teacher in your classmates about who you are instead of just like token information that no one's gonna remember.
Oh, yeah, that's true. So it's something that's very personal to you and something that you don't have to share if you don't want to. You choose what you're going to share, so it's very creative in that way. Yeah, that's good. Any other things that might? Yes.
I think like a lot of times, at least in my high school, like all the students were very separated and like felt like isolated and like, oh, nobody gets me, like I'm all alone. But like doing this kind of shows that like everybody goes through the same things.
Yeah.
So they're like all connected.
So everyone goes through these funny things. A lot of times we think we're the only ones that are thinking in certain ways or making mistakes in certain ways, and that other person over there that they're so cool, they've got everything together, and then you start hearing these things. It's like, oh, we're all kind of real people, so to speak. Okay. All right. So trying to get everyone to understand each other, maybe find things that are in common with each other. The more things we have in common, the more things we can laugh at with each other, not at each other, but with each other, that we have a better chance of building this camaraderie, okay? And that's gonna be a very big difference for your classroom management. Yes?
I don't know, I mean, I guess I went to like a different time, because, I don't know, we had a lot of cliques in our school, and like, we just normally hung out with our cliques, and we didn't really go out, and when we did, like, we actually did stuff like this, and with different people, we didn't really care about each other. We actually didn't we just sit there and kind of like talk to, if we knew someone in there, we'd talk to that person, but we wouldn't like talk to the other people. And we didn't really care. But I don't know, I guess like, it can work, and I've seen it, obviously it does work here, but like, I feel like in certain situations, more than half, it's just gonna be like, oh, you're that person. Oh, okay, cool story. All right, I'm gonna go back to being with my group of people, my friends and whatnot. And now I know that you don't like bees or something, I don't know. Because that's what our story's about beef. But it's like, oh, you don't like bees. Oh, okay, well, cool story. I'm gonna go back to being with my group of people, so I don't know. Now I'm just being a negative Nancy at this point, but I'm just trying to say like, I don't know, I guess I see a different outlook on things. So I guess I could see that there's a high possibility that a lot of people are just gonna stick to what they're comfortable with and their group of people they're comfortable with.
Okay. Yes.
I think that's fair from a student perspective, but I think as an educator, like, you wanna be able to say, well, that might be true, but it's my responsibility as an educator to try to encourage people from different groups to talk to each other. If you just kind of throw your hands up because, yeah, they probably won't be like friends after this, I think there's a responsibility there to encourage the blending of social groups and crossing of social lines. And yeah, it might not be effective. Not everything you do as a teacher is going to be effective. But to just say like, well, they're just going to go back to their groups anyway, so I'm not going to do icebreakers, or I'm not going to have them, because there's no negative to it. It might not have as much benefit as it could have. It might not always be super effective, but there's also no real downside. There's no like risk involved in an icebreaker activity.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah. And going off of that though too, like, if I had never met Emma before and we did this icebreaker and I found out that Emma doesn't like bees, I'd be like, oh, now I'm gonna remember this girl forever as the one that doesn't like bees. And I'm gonna like see you on campus and be like, hey, bee person.
So yeah, it can at least personalize. Yeah, and I think it could be what happened, Jared, and I don't know it in your situation, but, and I kind of said this when we did the human bingo, that you have to do these things on a regular basis, that a lot of times teachers will do it like here, and then we'll do one another 3 months later, and then 3 months later, and then that's it, and that isn't gonna work. It typically isn't, because pretty much you're going to say, oh, I'm gonna do this, but if you're doing it on a much more regular basis, maybe for a shorter amount of time, but like for 10 minutes here, then 2 weeks later, 10 minutes here, or maybe you're trying to build up some camaraderie, and this is one way that you're doing it, that it could have over time an effect. Yes?
Well, so even this year, like my British literature professor, like we did that, we would do like a go around question. We did one on the first day of class, and then like just random days throughout, the semester. And it was helpful because there were days that were like, it was the Friday before, or the day before Halloween or something like that, or it was the day of Halloween, and we're like not super focused, and it just like, there were certain days where it just gave us all like a little bit of space to like share something kind of fun, and then we could focus a little bit better, and you were still learning about each other throughout the year. We didn't do it every day, but like, I feel like we did it like 4 times throughout the
Yeah,
semester.
that's interesting, because like you say, before Halloween, so there's gonna be certain days where your class is not gonna be as focused. Like the day before Thanksgiving or something like that, where they can see something that's coming up, that, so this might be a good time, if they're in a good mood to begin with, a good time to say, I'm not gonna get a lot done anyway today. Maybe this is the time to pull in some of these ideas. So I would do them early, and then I would do them regularly, and then I would think about those opportunities because they do lend themselves well. Yes.
Sorry, I have more ideas on this, because I think it's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
But, when I was doing observations first semester for my one-on-one class, I was in an 8th grade English classroom, and the teacher, I think twice a week did, she called it good things, but she'd pick a student to lead it instead of her. And she'd go, okay, who wants to do good things? And somebody would volunteer, and they'd go like, okay, who has a good thing? And then they just share like a good thing from their week or something they were excited about or happy about. And it was led by a student, so like they were more comfortable than like feeling like they had to share something with their teacher.
Yeah.
But she was still listening and observing, and then like they were still interacting and stuff. And I thought that was like a really neat way to like also just encourage like positivity and stuff.
Oh, yeah, that is. That's a real good idea. Okay. So just think about this, as a possibility, because again, we're trying to build relationships. That's one of the big things now that Ohio wants you to do. It doesn't just want you to teach, science and whatever. Okay, can you give me a rundown of your story, and then I'll get to your story?
All right, well, our story starts with, I don't know, the after he was 14 or whatever, we were walking with a girlfriend, and B fell into his pants, and his girlfriend broke up with him because she didn't like the way he handled the bee situation, which then diluted into me. I sprayed a bee hive when I was a little kid with a hose. I got stung in the face by some bees, which then diluted into her sister got into a car accident because she thought a bee attacked her in her car, which then diluted to you went to Africa and got chased by bees, and then diluted into you getting into a car accident and totaling your car this Christmas.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so that brings up, just for me, it's like, wow, so I'm hearing some things that I would say, like I might say, Tom, what were you in Africa for? Or anything like that, or, were you hurt in the, I had the same thing with me, so it is interesting that does bring up a lot of interesting connections. What's our story over here?
Well, this morning it was hard to see because of the snow. That was my thing, so like it was hard to see. And then Emma last night slipped on the road because of the bad roads. And then Jack slipped down his stairs. And then Taylor was riding her bike one day, and a girl went out of the way so she can go through, and that girl slipped on the hill that was there, which went into the conversation about how Taylor got hit by a car when she was riding her bike. And then we kind of talked about like if she sued them, and so that talked about Emma's brother who slipped on when he was on crutches. He slipped at the school and broke his other leg. And then I was talking about how I slipped in middle school, like coming out of the car, and then that talked about then we talked about how Emma fell on her last day of senior year because she wore heels.
Oh,
That's what Bob's Burgers is.
Oh, yeah,
there's
and Bob,
Bob's
I didn't
Burgers.
understand that one because I didn't watch the show.
okay, well, they're fun. Those are fun, interesting. It didn't take us that long too. So, okay, thank you for sharing your stories. Okay, for the last 10 minutes now, I handed out something I want to talk about Vygotsky's. So I handed everybody, so at your desk you should have this. And I put all this information up here on the board to kind of give you some background for Vygotsky and his zone of proximal development, and that's what this is all about, zone of proximal development. This is another way to think about learning and thinking. So we have Piaget and his schema and assimilation and accommodation. We have that way of thinking about, how do students learn? How should we set up lessons? Well, Vygotsky, at the same time that Piaget is doing this, Vygotsky's in Russia, and he's coming up with the zone of proximal development, which makes a lot of sense when you go through this. So I just handed you that graphic there. Now that's in your reading, so it's in the same chapter as Piaget. It's the next thing that's coming up. I'm sorry, the graphic isn't in there, but Vygotsky is. The graphing is in your course documents. Okay, so you'll see it, you have that document there. So basically what this is, what Vygotsky is saying is that you have this content, I have this in terms of math. So I'm a 9th grade math teacher, okay? So in 8th grade, here's the math content, it goes on forever all the way until birth, okay? And then math content, that's what this band represents, is all math content, it goes on forever this way. Okay? And so in all this content, from the simple on the left to the more complex on the right, we're writing here, this is 9th grade content, and this is what I'm going to be teaching. Okay? So in 8th grade, they learned about like simple equations, like 3x equals 9, or how to plot a point on a graph. Okay? So that's grade 8, that's before me. Grade 9, before this lesson, which is systems of equations. Prior to that, earlier in the semester, or earlier in my quarter, or in the year, we talked about equations of lines. You can see the progression. We're going from grade 8 to grade 9. So we're talking about equations of lines now, and graphing lines. And so that's the prior knowledge. And now we're getting to the thing I want to talk about is systems of equations. So like 2 equations together makes a system. 2 linear or line equations makes a system. And this is what I want them to know, the system of equations, what it is, and how to graph it to find a point of intersection. And you can see beyond this in grade 10 and grade 11, they're going to look at other types of equations, like this one has like, you know, a nice curve to it. They aren't just straight lines. And here we're looking at trigonometric functions, sine, cosine, and tangent. So it just continues that way. Does that make sense? This is the content here, and we're writing here systems of equations. Okay, so the black is what the students already know. So they know simple equations, they know plotting points, and so this is the part of the content that they know, it's in black. Okay? Now you come over here into your graphic that you have, and you notice the black lines are solid, and then they start breaking down. So they're starting to break. In other words, I know a little bit about this, but not a lot. I don't know all of it. I know a little bit about this, and then you can see where it goes red. In other words, there's no black lines. That means I don't know any of this. Okay, I only know what's black. Okay, so the red, the blue, I don't know any of that. The red is what I want the students to learn in my lesson. The blue is what they'll learn in the future. Make sense? Now you see these yellow dots, and so think about Piaget. When you start a lesson, you're trying to get the students into a certain schema that they have so that you can make that schema, put information into that schema to broaden it. Okay? In other words, you might start with a review. You might start talking about, like in this case, I might say, all right, we learned about how to graph lines, and we know what an equation of a line is. That's what these yellow dots are. These are, I'm going back, and I'm trying to capture as much of the stuff that the students have just learned that I'm going to need for today's lesson. So the yellow line, so I'm going back. So Piaget would say you're activating a certain schema, a schema that you want to start building upon. You want to add information to. Okay? So that's the yellow dots. So now we get to the red dots, and so that's the content I'm going to teach. You can see that it starts to go, the red starts to become not all solid all the way across. In other words, I'm going to leave them off where they're going to be a little bit iffy on some things, but that's going to be picked up in the future. That's why the blue's there. Does this make sense? Now, for each of your students, they have their own zone. Everybody has the things that they know really well and those that don't. So what Vygotsky is saying with the zone of proximal development, what we do as teachers is we kind of guess where that zone is, where the students are, and we're saying, okay, this is what they're ready to learn right here in red, but I'm going to go back and put in this yellow. In other words, I'm going to go back on the stuff that I expected them to learn, to know, to pick up all those students that maybe aren't ready for the red yet. In other words, this is student 1. Student 2, they might have these black lines might be over here, and they might have no black lines right here. Does that make sense? Or they're just broken up here. In other words, they don't really remember this stuff too well, they never did really know it. You're gonna have some students that are gonna have this black all the way, and they're all the way to here, and it's like, geez, they already understand the first maybe 20 minutes of my lesson. So each student has their own zone of proximal development. Does that sort of make sense? So as teachers, what we do is, we always think about ourselves, how we learn best, and so we usually write a lesson up based upon how we learn best. We assume everybody's at a certain level. We assume one of these for the entire class, and then we create a lesson. And that's what you had done prior to coming into this class in August. Okay? And then what we've been doing in this class is saying, okay, that's based on me, how I learn. Now we're starting to realize that there are students that have different zones. And so now I've got to look at this lesson, I've got to say, what if the students don't know this or don't know this? And so maybe my lesson that I came here in August with was strictly in here. And now based upon this class, we're starting to say, well, maybe they don't know it, so maybe I've got to put in some prior stuff, some review, so to speak. That would be review for maybe some students, but it's going to be new knowledge for others. Okay? Because I'm trying to now account for not what I think the class is ready for, but all the variations in the class. So I might have students that are going to go through this very quickly, maybe some very exceptional students. And so maybe I'm going to have something ready for those that are going to go to like systems of nonlinear equations. In other words, these things with x to a power. Okay, if you look here, these x, here this is x to the third. So maybe I'm planning, okay, I'm going to go have this review. I'm also going to be ready for students that are going to zip through this, and I'm going to say, yeah, take a look at that. Even though that's not even my objective, I'm going to get them to start thinking about things that are much more complex, getting them ready for either the lesson tomorrow, the lesson next year, or something like that. Make sense? Okay? All right, so that's basically what his zone of proximal development is. And then we're going to talk more about Vygotsky. Let's see, it won't be Tuesday. It'll actually be after break, right? Because we have a visitor coming Thursday, so. Okay? So that's just an introduction. Okay, well, we'll have a nice